Oh my gosh. It's a podcast. That's amazing. Welcome to the Crazy Dre Podcast Show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's your main man, aka Crazy Crockett, aka Andres Podcast. I'd like to thank everyone out there that's been watching YouTube. There's a lot of downloads. You can also find me on Patreon. You can always find me on Spotify, Apple, anywhere that you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Singapore, you've been downloading my podcast for umpteen some times. Thank you. But today, folks, I'm going to continually talking about a little bit about, my last podcast was about what I learned from my dad's passing a year ago. But I'm going to talk more about being adopted and having a parent pass away, or having the parent that really did pretty much bring you up or brought you up. And but this is going to be a challenging podcast. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. Maybe around 10, 15 minutes of little clips here and there and so forth. Because there's just so much to elaborate. But for most of you guys out there, I'm adopted. I've always knew I was adopted. Obviously, I was 5 years old. Most of you guys don't even know that. That I was adopted by late. Most kids that get adopted are usually 6 months to 2 years old. And then life progresses on, and from that point. My half, because of my disability, of my cognitive intelligence or lack of cognitive intelligence, and my physical disability, made it more difficult for me to be adopted. But what does that mean? So when I was adopted, I found out that my birth parents abandoned me. And there's always stories about, how do you know it was your birth parents? It could have been her best friend's friend or whatever. But it wouldn't make sense for someone else to take on a child with a deformity that I had, unless it was the birth mother. So the birth mother, my theory is that my birth mother tried to have me, tried to take care of me, and then one day she gave up on keeping me, and then she abandoned the apartment that we were living in about maybe 6 months, 3 weeks, or whatever. There's never been clear case of what it was. But after that period, I was left in an apartment in a box. And I guess people heard me cry and sob, and obviously that's what infants do when they're hungry or not being taken care of, or need their sleep or whatever they need. So people in the apartment complex heard it, called the orphanage, and then there I go on my way to get living in a facility where nuns and sisters will take care of you. Now, what I've learned is that obviously when a child is between 1 and 3 years old, he needs to be around the primal mother to be nurtured and taken care of comfort, and it carries on to wild development of adulthood. And I never received that as an infant, obviously not until 5.5 years old. But this is the real question. This is what I'm going to talk about, being adopted. And this is where I'm going to go off a little bit on why you have to be careful of what you say when you want to say, oh, I want to adopt a child. I want to bring up a child as my own. And many of you people out there have your own reasons. Some of you can't bear children, and then they have surrogate mothers to do the caring for you. Some other women usually get their bodies tested, make sure that they're able to get pregnant, along with their spouse or their significant other. They work things out, and then other other people will go into adoption. Now, I'm not going to talk about the first two options. I'm going to talk about just being adopted. Now, I think most people need to realize that when you go into adoption, you have to be kind of understanding and knowing what you're getting yourself into. Now, my theory is that a lot of people that adopt kids, when they have other kids already, and then they see other people that have kids who are adopted, they think that it's cool. Oh, look at that family adopted child who was a brown baby, or an Asian baby, or a Romanian baby. That must be real cool. That must be really awesome that they did an awesome thing. And they think that the child is completely happy. I don't know if it's completely happy is a good term or philosophical way of thinking, but contempt, I guess. So I just want people to understand that being adopted is a good thing, but being adopted can be a very challenging thing for that person who is being adopted. Now, I say this out of an experience. Now, I have a cognitive learning disability. When I receive brand new information that is somewhat intellectually a little bit complicated, and when I mean complicated, I mean like new math, new science, new anything that's new science, new math, new anything like that. Now, a lot of people can learn something and comprehend it after being told 2 or 3 times or even reading it in a book. In my case, I would have to repeat the thing over and over again so that my brain became brain memory or muscle memory to understand that math theory or that scientific theory or whatever it was. However, the downside of that is that if you're in a classroom, you would have to find a way that you would have to learn it as fast as the other kids because class won't stop at your pace. So everyone learns differently. Some people take notes just manually. Some people would listen to notes on their Apple device or any recording device. Some people would just have to memorize stuff. And a lot of schooling, a lot of schoolwork is memorization. However, when I was going to school, you take 5 or 6 classes. I had one for math, one for science, one for English. Couldn't manage that at all. And I was always put in these self-awareness, disability advocates, disability classes. And what that really did is inform me that I was stupid. Now, some people that know me would tell me, oh, you're not stupid, you're really intelligent. Well, intelligent and knowing stuff are two different things. I may know stuff about sports, but I may not know enough things about physics. I think when you learn to understand physics or any scientific method or any proof or any new information about a theory, a classical theory, and it comes to your brain, understanding it, that's different intelligence. When I think about football or sports, that's just a game in itself that isn't really hard to it's not really hard to understand unless you don't like sports. Now, some people are like, I don't like science, but I understand science. Well, that's my point. If you don't like science, but you have to take a science course to pass for a degree, that's what you got to do. In my case, if I'm having 5 or 6 classes and put in this academic support class, I'm not really learning anything because I'm so consumed with falling behind. And I think that a lot of parents don't really understand that concept, what that means, because I knew that my parents helped me out in high school and through my whole school, helped me pass grades, pass tests. I know the teachers helped me pass tests. I know I learned to a certain degree where I get a C minus or a D plus or whatever, but I still passed. But that doesn't say much to that person when they grow up. Now, when that person grows up, he should go to college or should go to some trade school or some sort. But in my case, I the way that they taught people like me wasn't even in that spectrum. Autism, Asperger's wasn't in existence yet. Uh, they treated me, or the community would treat me like I was supposed to be in Special Olympics. My parents never signed me up to that. And I think there's a reason why for that, because they didn't want me to think and act like a mentally challenged person. What I mean by that is that a lot of people who are mentally challenged mentally are severely cognitive uh, intelligence are far behind. Uh, they don't understand emotions or don't understand what they say. They don't understand how to communicate when things don't go their way. And I tell you that in some ways I'm happy they did put me in those special ed classes. I really am. So when I say this, I don't mean to discriminate against Special Olympics or any people with disability or with Down syndrome or anything with physical or mental disability. Uh, do I think that may help me out? I don't know. I just don't know. I think I would have been even more frustrated because then that means I've been around people like that all the time. So I got to get a drink of water. So so what does that mean? That means, well, to move on to my next point is that when someone like me goes to a workforce, a work training or something, I'm put in a positions that I never wanted to work at. Some positions were factory jobs. Some positions were warehouse, receiving and groceries, GM, general merchandising, delivering trays to patients who are sick. Um, Anything that you can imagine, any light factory work. One of the biggest disadvantages that I will tell you that I have is that I don't, I'm not content ever. I always wanted to do things that I wanted to do in my life. And if that means play the guitar, play the drums, uh, being in a band in itself, anything like that is something that I was never really taught to do or never taught to try. I know when I was playing sports, I shouldn't have been playing sports with my own peers, and I wanted to, but that's because a lot of my peers were playing sports. So that was a way for me to connect with other kids my age, but I was never good at it. And when some kids are not good at sports, what they do, they play with instruments. But I can't play instruments either. Now, should have taken lessons by Def Leppard's drummer, or been motivated by Def Leppard's drummer to try to learn the drums, but for some reason I never took that into consideration. So when I understood that I was trapped in my own body, and this is what happens with people who are cognitive with a cognitive disability and a physical disability. When you have both of them, it's called a double whammy. It's a TV show back in the 80s, some late 70s, I think. And so, so excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather. So when you have a double whammy, you're put in a spot where you have to do the things that you don't want to do. People already try to put you in a spot where you are. Uh, they're already thinking about putting you on disability or SSI or SSDI. They want you to be kind of closed in into your own space. They want you to be moved into a group home where people around you will dictate where you and what you're going to do or what time you're going to come home. Uh, when my dad died, my three sisters have found a way to tell me that, in their own way, told me that if anything happens to me, they'll put me or help me out, but they'll put me in a certain spot in my life where I'm not ready for. I'm not going. I don't want to be moving in with any of my siblings. I don't want them to dictate when I can go. I don't want to be put into a place where people who are not related to me are telling me what I should or should not do. And a lot of people are surprised that I don't collect disability. And I tell you why I don't do that. It's because if I collected disability, I would never make enough money to live in this apartment. And I would never be able to do the things I want to do with my life. And to be socializing or to try to communicate with people or even going out to different restaurants. And one of the other disadvantage of that is that when you're disabled, no one really wants you, physically or emotionally. They like you there as a friend, they like you there as a person, but people don't really need you around them. People don't want you around them. Women don't want you to want them. And that's something that you're going to have to understand. As a person with a disability, yes, you see some people that are very lucky. And I really feel like the people who have messed up legs or amputees legs or arms, their cognitive intelligence is probably higher than mine. Probably. I'm guessing. But what I mean by that is that a lot of times you have to realize that women want somebody that can financially support them even if they are working too. And that's the truth, honest. And some women, I come across some women that I could have dated, but I know watching a couple of friends of mine who are disabled, their wives are pretty much doing everything for them. And that in a way where some of my friends and I are working, and their wives are working and making the money count. And I just can't do that. I don't ever want a wife that is working more than I am. And I don't know if it's a man thing or a masculinity thing, but it's a very demasculating when a woman can do more than what you can do. And I might be old school. I could be just the old school guy that I am. And that's another thing that I gotta really mention in this, is that just because someone's physically disabled, it doesn't mean that they are less masculine or more feminine. And I think that my physical appearance will place me into that zone where people really do think I'm feminine. They really think I'm like incredibly soft, and I think that they just really think I'm just not very much of a masculine man. Like, I would love to be able to work on cars. I would love to be able to do, like, go hunting and fishing on my own. I mean, I'm a classic old school guy that, you know what, if I go hunting, I would like to be able to gut my own fish or gut my own deer or elk or whatever. I would like to at least try to do that. But that's something that, you know, if you're going to have a gun or a rifle, you got to have the other hand to support the weapon. And everything is just so backwards where I am almost forced to be a really feminine personality. And I think that's what's really itching me as well. It's itching me that I am not that feminine. Now, a lot of people will like get mixed up and say, well, you're like Elvis Presley's music or D. Martin's music or whatever the music it is. But there's a reason why I like those guys because they are still masculine in their own way. They might dress fancier, they're still married to women, and they have a different way of showing the masculinity. I can't even pronounce that word correctly. But, and that's something that you have to understand with a person with my kind of disability is that is that I can't even pronounce words correctly sometimes. But I think that I think if you're really into if you really want to adopt somebody, adopt a child, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I think that you need to do a lot of your research. And I think that you need to understand that someday you're not gonna be that in that child's life where that person or that child will become an adult, a grown male, grown female. Uh, you cannot expect that child to understand anything that you give them. You cannot expect that child to have unconditional love for you. You cannot expect that child to understand your pain if you try to give them something that they never asked for. I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand when you adopt an older child is that if an older child like myself never knew what mom and dad are or what is mom and dad or mama and papa, you can't miss something you never had. And I know that I was excited when I was adopted because it was put in my brain that people want to adopt me. I was a very cute child. So I think there were a lot of people that wanted to adopt me, but because of my disability and my cognitive IQ, a lot of families backed out of it. And I tell you, I don't know how to explain this to people, but sometimes not knowing nothing is better than knowing everything. And what I mean by that is that if you don't know that you don't have a family and you're your own self in existence and you are being put into a group home without it being told to you, that might be a lot better than telling someone with a severe disability, physical or mental, that they can have the things that other people can have. That is a very questionable thing I think that people need to really think about. When you tell a disabled child that they can have whatever someone else has, that is sometimes can be a recipe of bad information. I think I would use an example of people that have Down syndrome children and they tell them that they can get married. I think that to me is kind of to me that's kind of to me that's kind of bad because if they're in a relationship and they get married their parents are still responsible for every action that they do or reaction or whatever. And when you have two people with Down syndrome who are going to procreate or think they are, you're almost dialing up to me, you're dialing up a lot of iffy situations. Other kids, their kids may be disabled with Down syndrome. It could be a lot of different things. And if that child is not disabled, of two Down syndrome children, of people, adults, how are they going to take care of that child? I don't understand that. I don't understand how that works. And I think it's a bad fantasy to tell people that they can have what you can have. I just don't think that's right. And this is going on like 26 minutes. So I just want people to know, and I'll try to elaborate maybe some of their ideas about being adopted, or well, not so much of being adopted, but the challenges of being disabled in the workforce. Maybe that's what I'm going to talk about next. But if you like this podcast, spread it around. Tell other people. It's a Crazy Dre podcast show. Give me some props on YouTube, on the Patreon, anywhere, Spotify, anywhere on Apple, anywhere that you download your podcast. I'm going to leave it that way. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope everyone has a great week. And I will do a podcast on the Detroit Lions after the game against San Francisco 49ers. It's a big game. I didn't do one with the Chicago Bears because I was under the weather and I still had to go to work. That's another one thing to talk about. So peace, love, I'm out of here.